Alright, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel. I'm here once again talking about Magic the Gathering. So, I've got the Commander bug. I've been very sick, and I've been cooking. I've been making decks. I've been looking at stuff. I've been looking at the Game Changers list and trying to figure out what the deal with the Game Changers list is. I've been looking at the ban list and trying to figure out what the deal with the ban list is. And I feel like both of these things don't address some of the core problems that I have with a social game like this. Now, if you're not familiar with me and the content that I make, I play a lot of games and design a lot of games that are very socially focused. And I've, designed competitive TCG stuff in the past. And looking at Commander, a casual format, the thing that makes it fun is the people that you play with, but also the thing that makes it fun is kind of this collaborative storytelling experience that you're having with your other friends at the table, where something is happening and you're all contributing pieces to that something. Now, when all of the pieces that you contribute to that something are "did you pay the one," it gets old really fast. And so I've picked up a couple of cards in particular, and I kind of want to discuss the different merits of them. The greatest offender of which I believe is Smothering Tithe. Now, Smothering Tithe is on the Game Changers list, but I believe it should be banned. Similarly, Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora, which is not on the list, but should be, also should be banned, in my opinion. Whereas I think things like Esper Sentinel, Fairy Mastermind, and Lothar aren't as bad. And I'm going to get into why in a little bit, and I've picked out these particular cards because I do want to talk about them in particular. But basically, Smothering Tithe says that on every single person's turn, regardless of whether they take any actions, because drawing a card is mandatory as part of your turn, I will have to ask you, does my Smothering Tithe activate? Or do you pay the 2? And because Magic the Gathering is such a greedy format kind of game just in general, where it's like requiring you to, okay, untap with 7 mana, I'm spending 7 mana this turn. Very, very rarely are you ever going to wanting to pay the 2. And it just generates so much value for free, essentially, because people do not want to engage with this thing. And on the more casual end, on like the 3, which is where I play, on the 3, you're not super removal heavy. Everything is a bit more negotiation focused. You're only playing a couple game changers, and Smothering Tithe is most likely the game changer of choice if you're playing a white deck. And so you can have multiple people at the table that are asking this question: did you pay for the thing? And then if 2 players have a Smothering Tithe, you will have the following conversation 9,000 times in a game, which is, did you pay the tax? Does this resolve? And then that's the only conversation that's really happening. And I think that that's really uninteresting, unfortunately. It kind of drains away from what's going on. And so I've kind of picked out some other stuff that does similar things but slightly different. So it's kind of like, do you want to have the same thing, or would you rather depower your choices? Instead of playing Smothering Tithe, a game changer, you could be playing Monologue Tax. Monologue Tax does the same thing, kinda. It says whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, you create a treasure token. And so instead of doing this like as a design philosophy, right? And I think Magic is heading in the right direction. We've seen a lot of this kind of thing. Orcish Bowmasters is actually a really interesting look into this as well, because you get the existing printed version and you get the arena changed version. The existing printed version says Orcish Bowmasters comes in, it deals 1 damage to something, it amasses an army. The arena changed version says that Orcish Bowmasters comes in and it doesn't do anything, and then whenever your opponent draws cards after the first one, then it starts to deal damage and amass an army, which is kind of signaling us the design philosophy that it should be moving in that direction. I think Smothering Tithe should be banned, and everything that has second time written on it should be way more encouraged to be played. Monologue Tax was printed for a reason, and I think that we should be encouraging this kind of design space where it's like, okay, I'm playing the gigantic dinosaur deck, I'm just going to be playing a thing that costs 8, I don't need to worry about anything that says casting your second, drawing your second, anything like that. and it allows certain play styles where instead of doing lots of little things, certain play styles that encourage playing the big janky thing become better, become more fun. And like EDH way back when it kind of started, was a jank format. We were playing. There's a spell in Ravnica where it's an enchantment and you play it and it exchanges ownership of itself with something else. I can't remember what it's called. And it would move around the table 100 times and exchange, ownership with a lot of different things. It's like not a good card, but at the time it was a lot of fun. It was really jank. It cost like 5, and it feels like now in my recent experience playing more modern Commander, that doesn't happen anymore. You're not doing the big silly thing. People are playing it, have so many more options for competitive cards that 3, the power level that I think that EDH should be played at, because 2 is kind of hello, I have a precon, and then 1 is hello, I have a precon. 2 is I'm still learning the game, and then 3 is like I've been playing Magic the Gathering for over 20 years, so I think it's difficult to play anything less than a 3, and I'm not trying to play EDH competitively, so I shouldn't be playing anything more than a 3. Whenever I'm building a deck list, I'm building everything, and I'm using no game changes. I get to slot 98, and I go, okay, maybe I'll play 1. I'll play 1 Orcish Bowmasters, and that'll be enough for me. And it's not, like, it doesn't matter. I did a deck video of Ultima, where they were playing, colorless High Tide. And the game changes that are put in is just the colorless mana rocks that make it go fast. But the cards that I arguably think are busted in that deck are not game changes. They're not on the ban list. And so it feels like EDH is in this weird precipice where cards like Smothering Tithe get way too much attention and shouldn't be in the format. And then cards like Monologue Tax, which is a more fun-focused design, don't get any attention in the same way. And I picked out some other stuff because Esper Sentinel's kind of the same problem. Esper Sentinel says I'm going to be drawing a card on pretty much every single person's turn, but it costs 1, which is kind of insane to just always be drawing a card because no one's paying the 1 all the time. And that's really insane, and yet this is not on the game changes list. This is not banned anywhere. It's like an insane amount of card draw, drawing 3 cards a turn. Whereas something like Fairy Mastermind is way more balanced and way more fair, because Fairy Mastermind just is whenever your opponent draws their second card. So if they're being greedy, if they're getting more than they get for free, then you start to benefit. Lotho is similar, although I think Lotho is very, very strong. However, I think the you losing the 1 life downside and his 1 toughness isn't that crazy. So it actually is kind of fine compared to Smothering Tithe. He does cost a lot less to get into play, so he will exist potentially for a whole turn earlier. But people can just not cast 2 spells. They can just cast 1 big spell. Like for the first couple of turns, you're like, I'm casting something cost 3, I'm casting something cost 4. It's not a big deal. And so something like Lotho seems a lot less crazy than Smothering Tithe, even though it basically does the same thing as Monologue Tax. The Monologue Tax just costs 1 extra and has less downside. So I think a lot of this stuff, and like these are all easy to be shut off with things like you can only cast 1 spell per turn. Effects is a lot of white enchantments that say you can only cast 1 spell per turn, which basically turns off Lotho completely, turns off Monologue Tax completely, but Smothering Tithe is still generating treasures for free. And so I think trying to print more cards that interact in this way, where it punishes a player for being greedy rather than punishes a player for using a card that you've printed 600 times. Do you know how many printings of Smothering Tithe there is? More than 1. A lot. It's in a lot of Commander content. It's in a lot of Commander stuff. And I think it shouldn't be. I think it's kind of crazy, actually. But I want to look at this from a game designer's perspective. Let's pretend I get hired and I'm working in R&D and I have to, first of all, manage the ban list, but change how Commander is working forever, right? What kind of things would I be doing? Well, I would, first of all, look at the game changes list, because I think there's a lot of cards that should be on there and aren't, and that, because it is still relatively new, I think they will be adding things in the future. And there is a lot of stuff on the ban list that I think, maybe more things could be put on there And like that's also fun. Let's pretend that I've perfected that, but we're going to design new cards and new scenarios and stuff like that. One of the main things that I would start looking at doing is Trouble in Pairs is like a really great example, because Trouble in Pairs says if any player is greedy about anything, I benefit. So it says if a player would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead, which is fantastic, except for with Emrakul, that takes control of a player and then gives them an extra turn. They skip that extra turn, which is brutal. Every other scenario where it's like, I'm going to start taking extra turns, Trouble in Pairs will stop that. There's also Ugin's Nexus that does that. It stops players from taking additional turns, but if Ugin's Nexus is destroyed, you take an extra turn, which I think is also great. I think that works fine within the parameters of what we're trying to do here. But then the rest of the text on the card is whenever an opponent attacks with 2 or more creatures, draws their second card, or casts their second spell, you draw a card. And we should be looking at creating effects like this in every color according to its color identity. So if we had something like red, it would be if a player had a second land come into play, you draw a card or something like that. Something kind of like a Ankh of Mishra's Those Are the Punisher vibe, but instead of dealing damage, you're getting card advantage. Or in red, it would be more likely exiling card off the top of your deck and you can play it into your next end step. The opponent attacking you with 2 or more creatures is also on. There's a legendary white creature that does the same thing. I can't remember their name. And then all of this, the ones in particular that I picked here are based around players drawing cards. And so we don't have really any extra things like this in every color. And it wouldn't be too hard to create versions of those things, but also in multicolored versions. That's why I like Lotho, because Lotho creates a restriction that says, I'm very good, but you have to be playing both black and white. A mono white deck does not have access to me, and a mono black deck does not have access to me in that kind of category of thing. And encouraging players to play more colors means that some of these monocolored things are less powerful compared to multicolored options. So if we were to make multicolored options of these kind of things, then that would also be kind of interesting. Like if we had a multicolored monologue tax that, let's say, added red and then added an extra line of text on that, I think also wouldn't be terrible. So I kind of want to be looking at, instead of every time something happens, my opponent is required to spend mana to stop me from punishing their greed, which kind of sucks. Like, Realistic Study isn't punishing a player for being greedy. Realistic Study is punishing a player for casting spells. That's the one thing you do in this game. Whereas Trouble in Pairs is only the second spell, right? It's like you've had one, you've had first spell, second spell, that's too much. And I understand that feels so much more fair, right? Or something like, I think it's called Magebane Lizard, where it's like every time your opponent plays a non-creature spell, they take 1 damage, but it's 1 damage for every previously cast non-creature spell this turn. Something like that. And it's basically a Storm Hate card. And if we're looking at, and like red in particular, which doesn't have a lot of interaction with these kind of effects, instead of punishing them with damage, which makes you a target at the table when you're impacting everyone's life total greatly, as opposed to this, where you're like, hey, I have 10 treasures, it's not a big deal, don't worry about it. Here's my omniscience, I'm now going to win the game, is unfair, is kind of a goofy problem to have to deal with, I think. And instead, if we had something in red that was like, okay, something like Trouble in Pairs, something like it could generate tokens. Like, imagine if whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, create 2 1/1 goblin tokens. And it's a creature, it probably costs 3, it's probably a legendary, and that fits right here into this pantheon. You could easily see that sitting amongst these kind of things. What about green? So we could use something like the Explore mechanic. There's a Merfolk that I really like that says whenever you explore, you can play a land from your hand. So we could do something like that, where it's literally like whenever a player casts their second spell, you may play a land from your hand onto the battlefield, which is like Burgeoning, except Burgeoning is counting other players playing lands. This instead would be like, okay, I get to play extra lands every time my opponents play an extra spell. And that I would similarly make a probably 3-cost enchantment. And then what about colorless? The only colorless is a little bit more complicated because colorless has a lot of hate cards that just kind of hose everything, and that means that every deck can play it. So creating a tithe effect in colorless means that every deck can play it, and it should be kind of overcosted. But anything that costs more than 4 is probably unplayable for what it's trying to do. So I think having something that's I really want to say like trading post kind of effect, or like a staff of domination kind of effect. But I think actually having an artifact that's like, I do something, or every time you tap me, I do something. Untap me whenever a player casts their second spell for the turn. Which could also be something like mono red effect as well, because we have things like there's a couple of like, I tap, deal 1 damage to each opponent, and then when you do something of a type, I untap. Like there's a pirate one that untaps whenever you cast a pirate spell. That kind of stuff could also work fine. But in colorless, it could just be like staff of punishing my opponent for being greedy. And it's whenever my opponent casts a second spell, untap this, and it's like tap, pay 1 life, draw a card, and it costs 4. And again, perfectly, that would fit in amongst these cards. So I think we have kind of 2 problems. I think that the power level tiers, and saying the power level tiers are awkward already, right? That's not new information. I feel like a lot of content creators have said this. But I think the game changes list is inequitable. I think some cards on the game changes list are much more powerful than others. I would say Smothering Tithe is worse than any number of tutors. I think realistically, every deck could just have 3 tutors and it's not a big deal. I created a green, black, white deck where the whole point was that it would make infinite combos with creatures, and the 3 game changes that I played were just 3 things that tutor for creatures. That's way less insane than Smothering Tithe, in my opinion. Because a tutor says, hello, I'm getting a thing. This is the thing. And then you go, oh, I understand how this card works. It goes infinite with this other thing. I need to assemble removal for this thing. Like, you're literally foreshadowing an action. When you slam Smothering Tithe, you don't know what the thing is that Smothering Tithe is enabling. In the set that Smothering Tithe was released, the thing that Smothering Tithe enabled was the extort mechanic, so that you would have extra treasure to pay for extort on top of the other cards that you were playing, and it was largely unplayable. And then into a format like EDH, we have multiple opponents. You're drawing, that many extra cards. It's a lot. It really should just be draws their second card, create a treasure. And, it wouldn't be that crazy just to make a card that says that. Just literally depowered Smothering Tithe. Like, maybe it's less smothering. Maybe it's irritating Tithe. And it's whenever an opponent draws their second card, they may pay 2. If not, you get a treasure. And there's no reason to not assess cards that are on the game changes list, cards that are banned, and cards that enable fun, or cards that are really consistently used in a format, and creating versions of them that enable fun for lower tiered players. For Smothering Tithe is kind of unfun for like really beginner players because they don't really understand how much it's generating, what kind of problems it is. Are they ever going to pay the 2? Do I get to do nothing because I paid 2 on my turn? It's like a really awkward thing for them to have to engage with. But seeing something that says, whenever you do this specific action, when you have made a choice that enables this thing, I benefit. They go, okay, how can I make choices to avoid that specific thing? You can't stop drawing a card on your turn. That happens automatically. And I can't stop casting a spell, and then my opponent goes, do you pay the 1? I intend to play the game also. So Re-6 Study and Smothering Tithe create this really awkward design scenario where it's kind of impossible to play around beyond just having infinite mana and always being able to pay for the amount. Whereas creating clauses that punish players for specific greedy behavior, and by greedy I mean, like Lotho, we're playing extra spells, or Trouble and Bears trying to take extra turns, or attacking with like a large number of creatures, then you create cards that look at a specific behavior of a player that's really common. It could be playing too many lands. It could be drawing too many cards. It could be creating too many treasures. Why don't we have a green spell that says if a player created 2 or more treasures of a type this turn, destroy treasures or artifacts or something, right? Like, there just needs to be so many more Trouble in Pairs type cards in the color wheel that deal with other specific different problems. And look, I haven't memorized every single Magic the Gathering card, but I do know a lot of them. And if some of these things exist, please do let me know in the comments, because I think that this is a really interesting design space, and I think we should be encouraging Wizards to be printing cards that work like this so that it kind of fits in this arena, so we can fill out the design space with more things. Because if you go, hey, I'm playing Smothering Tithe, people go, hey, that we really hate that card in this group, and you go, that's cool, I'll swap it for Monologue Tax. And you go, actually, that's fine. It's way less irritating in general. And I think that that works out okay. And so trying to encourage more cards designed in this way is only going to make for EDH to be a better experience, instead of encouraging them to do the fucking 90th Smothering Tithe reprint. Anyway, that's my rant. Apparently, I hate Smothering Tithe a lot, but I do actually enjoy a lot of other cards that try and do the same thing, but better, but fairer, but more fun. The goal is to create a joy exchange where I am generating joy for me without taking more joy than I generate from another player. That is a core game design tenet. If I make you have a terrible time and I am just having a fine time, that is an inequitable exchange, and I believe Smothering Tithe fits into this category. Now, I'll stop ranting for a moment. I am just starting to work on making a bit more Magic the Gathering content, so if you are keen on that kind of stuff, let me know. Stick around. I'm going to have a playlist up on the screen. It's going to be on this side for a change, and I'm going to be doing some, kind of EDH commentary. I'm going to be doing some EDH deck building. I have a video coming up talking about other different small formats and stuff that I'm working on. So stick around, check out some of that kind of stuff. I'm really excited to be, playing around with this game. I got 20 years worth of experience. I might as well put it to work. So hopefully there's going to be some cool stuff coming out soon for you to check out.